They say family shows up when it matters most. Mine didn't. Not when I needed them most. Not even when my life hung on surgery. That's how I want to start, because if I sugarcoat it, it won't be the truth. And I promised myself that if I ever shared this story, I'd tell it exactly as it happened. Raw, painful, and without pretty ribbons tied around the edges. My name is Lillian Hayes, and I'm 74 years old. Before I go any further, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from today? I always like to know because in some small way it makes me feel like I'm not alone in this. Like somewhere out there, someone is listening with an open heart. And maybe, just maybe, you'll understand why I did what I did. The truth is, my body isn't what it used to be. Years of arthritis, a frail hip, and more recently, a diagnosis that made my doctor's face tighten as he looked at the papers. We'll need to schedule surgery, Lillian, soon. It wasn't one of those optional procedures. It was the kind where the doctor leans in and tells you, if we don't, it could get worse, much worse. So I did what any mother would do. I called my children. I have 3. Daniel, my oldest son, Patricia, my daughter, and Andrew, my youngest boy. They each have their own families now, busy lives. I understand that. But when a mother tells her children she's going under the knife, you expect them to show up, at least to ask, "What do you need, Mom?" I set the surgery date. I even asked the nurse to call each of them with the details, just to make sure they knew. I imagined them sitting in the waiting room, maybe bickering a little, but there. I imagined waking up after anesthesia and seeing my daughter's face, maybe holding my hand. Isn't that what mothers picture? But the day came. I went in, I signed the papers, I lay down on that cold table, and when I woke up, it was silence. The nurse asked, "Would you like me to call your family now? Maybe they're running late." My lips were dry, and I remember whispering, "Yes, maybe." But a part of me already knew. Hours passed, no footsteps in the hall, no flowers, not even a phone call. The doctor came in that evening and said, "Surgery went well. You're strong, Mrs. Hayes." I smiled faintly, but inside I thought, strong for who? Strong for what? Because what good is strength if the people you love most don't even care enough to show up? 2 days later, when I was discharged, it wasn't my children who came to pick me up. It was my neighbor, sweet old Mrs. Carter, who doesn't even drive well at night but insisted anyway. She shuffled me into her car, her hands trembling on the steering wheel, muttering, "I don't know where your kids are, Lillian, but if they were mine..." She didn't finish the sentence. I sat in her passenger seat, staring out the window, feeling smaller than I had in years, and that's when she told me. "They weren't here because they were at your beach house," she said, glancing sideways at me. "I stopped by on Saturday to drop off that jam I made you. They were out on the porch, all of them. Loud voices. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I heard enough. They were arguing about who gets the place when you're gone." Her words fell like stones in my chest, so that was it. While I lay cut open on a surgeon's table, my children sat at the house their father built with his own 2 hands, fighting like wolves over scraps that weren't even theirs yet. Not one of them thought to come. Not one of them thought I might need them. That night, I lay awake in my recliner, stitches aching, the house too quiet. I stared at the photograph of my late husband, James, on the mantel. He built that beach house for me 40 years ago, every nail and beam soaked with sweat and love. I whispered to his picture, "James, they don't even care. Not about me, just about the walls you built." Tears burned down my cheeks. But beneath the sorrow, something else began to stir. A seed of anger, a seed of resolve. If my family could skip my surgery to argue over a house, then maybe they didn't deserve it. Maybe they didn't deserve me. That was the night my story really began. Because from then on, I wasn't just a weak, recovering woman. I was someone who had been betrayed. And betrayal, my dear, has a way of sharpening the mind. And what my children didn't know, what they never expected, was that while they argued about their future, I had already started thinking about mine, not the one that included them, but the one that finally put me first, the beach house. Just saying the words brings up a flood of memories. For my children, it's nothing more than a prize to win, a piece of property. But for me, it was the heart of our family. I still remember the day James first brought me to the lot where it would stand. The ocean stretched wide in front of us, waves rolling in steady as a heartbeat. He spread his arms and said, "Lillian, this is where we'll build our dreams." I laughed at him then, thinking it was just one of his whimsical ideas. But James wasn't whimsical. He was determined. A man who believed in working with his hands, who said love was something you built, not just something you said. For months, he worked on that house himself, hammering, sawing, hauling wood. I carried him sandwiches and lemonade, sometimes sat on the porch beam while it was still just bones of wood, listening to him talk about the future. The kids will learn to swim here. Summers will be loud, full of laughter. And when we're old, we'll sit out here together and listen to the sea. And he was right. The kids did learn to swim there. Patricia used to shriek every time the water touched her toes, while Daniel tried to dive headfirst into waves twice his height. Andrew, my baby, always clung to my legs until he was nearly 10, terrified. Of jellyfish, I can still see James standing knee-deep in the surf, arms out, coaxing them into the water like it was a baptism. Those summers were the best of our lives. Cookouts on the sand, card games on the porch when rain drove us inside, the smell of salt and sunscreen clinging to our skin. And when the day was over, James and I would sit together, watching the children sleep in a sandy heap, whispering, "This is what it's all for." For years, I believed the house carried that magic, that it would bind us together no matter what storms came. Even after James passed, I clung to it. Every board, every creak of the stairs reminded me of him. I'd sit on the porch with my coffee, close my eyes, and hear his laugh carried on the wind. But something shifted as the children grew older. They stopped seeing it as a memory, a gift. Instead, it became a trophy, a thing to fight over, a possession. I remember one Christmas, not long after James's passing, when Daniel leaned over the table and said, "So, Mom, have you thought about who gets the beach house? I mean, it should probably go to the eldest, right?" Patricia rolled her eyes, snapped back, "You mean the one who never visits?" And Andrew, sweet Andrew, he just muttered, "It's not for us to decide." I thought that was just sibling bickering. Families argue, don't they? But over time, the comments grew sharper. Each visit to the house ended with subtle digs. Emily, my daughter-in-law, once muttered that the place was wasted on an old woman who only used it twice a year. I pretended not to hear, but her words cut deep. It wasn't wasted. It was sacred. Still, I stayed quiet. Maybe because I wanted to believe they'd come around. Maybe because, in my heart, I still wanted to keep James's dream alive. But lying in that hospital bed, hearing from Mrs. Carter that my children had been at the beach house instead of by my side, it shattered something in me. They weren't protecting memories. They weren't cherishing their father's legacy. They were circling it like vultures, waiting for me to be gone so they could tear it apart. That was when I realized something I never thought I'd admit. The house no longer felt like love. It felt like a curse. One afternoon, not long after I returned from the hospital, I drove out there alone. I wanted to see it with fresh eyes. I walked through the rooms, the creaky floorboards, the faded curtains, the old seashell collection still lined up on the mantel. And instead of comfort, I felt heaviness. I ran my fingers along the wood James sanded by hand, and instead of warmth, I felt the weight of all those fights, all those greedy whispers. It was as if the house itself was tired of being fought over, tired of being the prize in a game I never agreed to play. I sat on the porch until the sun went down, watching the waves crash. And in that quiet, I heard James's voice in my head. or maybe just my own, heart speaking back to me. Lillian, it's just wood and walls. Don't let them tear you apart over it. For the first time in 40 years, I thought about letting it go. Not because I wanted to, but because holding on had begun to hurt more than it healed. That night, back at home, I stared at the deed in my drawer. The paper felt heavier than stone. My children wanted it so badly. But should they get it? Did they even deserve it? I didn't have the answer yet, but the seed was planted. Because maybe, just maybe, the house wasn't meant for them at all. I've always believed that people show their true colors in small ways, long before the big betrayals come. Looking back now, the signs had been there for years. Little comments, small gestures, things I brushed off as harmless. But after my surgery, when the fog of hope finally cleared, those signs became glaring. It was a Sunday afternoon when I invited everyone over for lunch. My stitches still ached when I moved too quickly, but I set the table, made roast chicken, even put out James's favorite china. Maybe it was foolish of me, trying to gather them under one roof to remind them that family came before property, but I needed to look into their eyes and see if there was any love left. They came, but not in the way I hoped. Patricia was the first through the door, already on her phone, barely glancing up as she kissed my cheek. Daniel followed with his wife Emily, who carried a bottle of wine like it was some grand offering. Andrew came last, quieter than the others, his wife whispering something sharp in his ear before they stepped inside. I tried to push away the unease. I smiled, poured the tea, asked about the grandchildren, but the conversation kept circling back. Not to me, not to my health, not even to my recovery, but to the house. It started innocently enough. Daniel leaned back in his chair after finishing his meal and said, "So, Mom, have you thought about what's next with the beach house? I mean, with everything you've gone through, maybe it's time to make a plan." I froze, the fork slipping from my fingers. "What kind of plan?" I asked, though I already knew. He shrugged as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You know, whose name it goes under, just so there's no confusion later." Patricia snorted into her glass of wine. "Confusion? You mean so you can grab it before anyone else?" She turned to me, her voice tightening. "Mom, you know it makes more sense for me. I live closer and I'd actually use it." Emily rolled her eyes. "Use it? You mean rent it out on weekends? That place deserves better. It should stay in the family. In our hands." She placed her hand possessively over Daniel's like they were already signing papers in their heads. And Andrew, sweet, timid Andrew, he just stared at his plate, pushing peas around with his fork. But even silence can be loud. I tried to redirect. I told them about my doctor's advice, how the recovery would take months, how I might need help with errands. But my words slid past them like water on glass. Patricia cut me off. "Mom, let's not be dramatic. You're fine. We just need to settle this house business before it turns ugly." Before it turns ugly. As if it wasn't ugly already. I sat there, my chest tight, listening to them argue across the table I had so carefully set. Their voices rose, overlapping, sharp and selfish. They weren't speaking to me anymore. They were speaking through me, over me, as though I were already gone. I looked around at the faces of my children, the very people James and I raised to value love over things, and all I saw was hunger. For a moment, I thought about yelling, about slamming my hands on the table and telling them that the house was mine, that I wasn't dead yet, but instead, I sat very still. Because in that stillness, I realized something important. They didn't expect me to fight back. They had already decided what I would do, and maybe that was my advantage. After they left, I gathered the dishes in silence, my hands trembling. The house echoed with their absence, but not in the way it used to. It wasn't the warm quiet of family gone home after a long visit. It was the hollow quiet of betrayal. As I washed each plate, I kept hearing Emily's words. "That place deserves better. It should stay in our hands." our hands, not mine, not James's memory, theirs. That night, I sat in my bedroom staring at the ceiling, my mind churning. I thought about how quickly they had dismissed my health, about how they barely acknowledged the scar running across my side, about how they argued over a house as though I were already buried in the ground, and I thought, if they believe it's already theirs, then maybe it never should be. It wasn't anger that settled in me that night. It was clarity, a cold, calm kind of clarity. I knew then that the next move I made would define everything, not just my relationship with my children, but the legacy I would leave behind. And for the first time in a long while, I decided to stop waiting for them to change. If they couldn't see me as more than an obstacle standing between them and a house, then I would stop being an obstacle at all. But not in the way they expected. The days after my surgery should have been filled with comfort. At least, that's what I thought. Recovery, after all, isn't just about the body. It's about the soul. You need people. You need presence. But for me, recovery was a quiet, empty room with nothing but the tick of the wall clock and the ache of my stitches. When the nurse came in to check my blood pressure, she asked again if I wanted her to call my family. I smiled faintly and shook my head. "No," I whispered, though my heart screamed yes. But I couldn't take another moment of waiting by the door, hoping to hear footsteps that never came. It was easier to pretend. I didn't expect them. Easier to let the silence settle around me like a blanket, even if it felt more like a shroud. On the third day when they discharged me, I gathered my things myself. A small overnight bag, a sweater folded neatly on the chair. I half expected, even then, to see Patricia's car pull up, or Daniel's tall figure striding through the hallway, or Andrew nervously clutching flowers. Something, anything. But no one came. Instead, it was Mrs. Carter, my neighbor of 20 years, who walked in, her cardigan buttoned wrong, her hands fumbling with the strap of her purse. "I heard they were letting you out today," she said, her voice warm but heavy with concern. "I didn't want you walking out alone." I nearly wept right there, in front of her. She wasn't blood. She wasn't bound to me by duty. But she came. She showed up. And in that moment, she felt more like family than my own children. She helped me into her little sedan, the one that rattled if you drove over 40. As we pulled away from the hospital, she kept glancing at me, her mouth twitching like she had something to say. Finally, as we passed the turn toward the coast, she cleared her throat. "Lillian, I don't want to upset you, but you deserve to know. I saw your children this weekend, at the beach house." Her words hit me like a wave of ice water. She hurried on. "I went by Saturday evening. I thought maybe I'd leave some of that strawberry jam you like on the porch. But when I got close, I heard them. Loud voices. They were arguing about who would get the place if—" She trailed off, her eyes flicking toward me, searching my face. "If you didn't make it." My breath caught in my throat. I gripped the door handle, the stitches in my side burning. She touched my arm gently. "I'm sorry, Lillian. I didn't mean to overhear, but it was impossible not to. They weren't talking about you, dear. They were talking about the house. Only the house." The world outside blurred as I blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. My children, my flesh and blood. While I lay under anesthesia, they sat in the home James built, fighting over what would happen once I was gone. Not a word about whether I'd survive, not a thought about what I might need. Just walls, just wood, just greed. Mrs. Carter drove on in silence after that, giving me the dignity of my quiet. But inside, I was breaking. That night, back home, I sat in my recliner staring at the ceiling. My body ached from more than the surgery. It was a soul-deep ache, the kind you can't fix with pain medicine. I looked at the photo of James again, the one I kept on the mantel. His smile, his strong jaw, the way his arm curled protectively around me in that picture, and I whispered, "You'd be ashamed of them, James. You'd be ashamed of what they've become." For the first time since he passed, I felt something like anger, not just sorrow, not just grief, but pure, white-hot anger. Because here's the truth. They didn't just abandon me. They chose a house over me, and in doing so, they told me everything I needed to know. In the days that followed, their absence stretched on. Not one phone call, not one check-in. Patricia sent a text 3 days later. "Hope you're recovering. We're heading down to the beach house this weekend, so don't worry about us." I stared at the message until the letters blurred. Don't worry about us. Not a word about me. Not a word about my pain, or the scar healing across my side, or the loneliness that wrapped me tighter than any blanket. Just their plans, their priorities, their beach house. That was the moment something hardened in me, because I realized that my recovery, my survival, meant nothing to them if it didn't involve the house. And if that was the case, then maybe it was time to take the one thing they valued most and put it where they could never touch it again. It wasn't spite that pushed me toward that decision. It was survival. If my children couldn't be trusted with my heart, they certainly couldn't be trusted with my legacy. And so, quietly, I began to plan. Not just for my recovery, but for a different kind of healing. The kind that comes when you finally stop letting others trample over you and you decide to take back control. Grief can keep you frozen, but anger, real sharp anger, has a way of waking you up. The days after Mrs. Carter's revelation were different. I moved slower with my body, yes, because the stitches still pulled and throbbed, but my mind had never been sharper. Every detail, every conversation, every dismissive glance from my children replayed like film reels in my head. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. I needed to protect myself, not just from their words, from their intentions. One morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea, staring at the deed to the beach house. I'd kept it in a drawer for years, tucked away like something sacred. But now, when I looked at that folded paper, I didn't see a legacy. I saw a target on my back. I whispered to myself, if they love this house more than they love me, then it doesn't belong to them. The thought scared me at first. Selling it? Letting it go? It felt like betraying James, betraying all those summers filled with laughter and sand between our toes. But then I thought about him. About how fiercely he protected me, about the way he used to say, "Lillian, never let anyone take advantage of you." And I realized, maybe letting the house go wasn't betrayal at all. Maybe it was protection. I didn't know where to start, so I picked up the phone and dialed an old friend, Robert Jenkins. He'd been James's fishing buddy back in the day, but more importantly, he was a realtor now. A quiet, trustworthy one. When he answered, his voice was warm and steady, just like I remembered. "Lillian, well, this is a surprise. How are you holding up?" I swallowed hard. "Robert, I need some advice, and I need it kept quiet." There was a pause on the line, a shift in his tone. "Of course. Tell me what's on your mind." I lowered my voice, even though I was alone in the kitchen. "The beach house. I want to know what it's worth, and if I were to sell, how quickly it could be done." For a moment, there was silence. Then Robert said gently, "You sure, Lillian?" "That place is—" "I'm sure," I cut in, sharper than I meant to. My voice cracked. "I don't want my children to know, not until the papers are signed. Can you help me with that?" He hesitated only briefly. "Yes. If that's what you want, I'll make sure it's handled discreetly. No signs, no chatter, just the right buyer, quietly." Relief flooded me, so strong it nearly made me dizzy. "Thank you, Robert." "Are you doing this for the right reasons?" he asked carefully. I closed my eyes. I'm doing it because they left me alone in a hospital bed while they sat there, arguing about it like it was already theirs. I won't let them tear me apart over it." There was a long sigh on the other end, then his quiet agreement. "All right then. I'll start looking." That night, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. It wasn't that the pain was gone. My side still ached, my heart still felt bruised. But for the first time, I felt like I was taking back control. Still, I wasn't reckless. I knew my children too well. If they suspected what I was doing, they'd find a way to stop it. So I tested them. The following Sunday, over another strained family meal, I stirred the pot just to see their reactions. Between bites of chicken, I said casually, "You know, with the medical bills piling up, I sometimes wonder if I should sell the beach house. It would make things easier." The room froze. Patricia's fork clattered against her plate. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Emily actually scoffed out loud. "You wouldn't do that," Daniel said, his voice firm, almost threatening. Patricia leaned forward, her tone sharp. "Don't be ridiculous, Mom. That house belongs to us. Selling it, that's not an option." Emily smirked, shaking her head. "Medical bills come and go, but the house, that's family property. You wouldn't dare." I kept my face neutral, even as their words burned. In that moment, their entitlement was laid bare, not even masked by politeness. They weren't asking me not to sell. They were telling me I couldn't, and that was all the confirmation I needed. After they left, I sat alone at the table, staring at the crumbs scattered across the tablecloth. My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from adrenaline. They thought I wouldn't dare. They thought I was too old, too fragile, too sentimental to make such a move. But they had forgotten something important. I was still James's wife. I was still Lillian Hayes. And when it came to protecting myself, I could be just as strong as the man who built that house with his bare hands. So I whispered into the quiet, "Watch me." The funny thing about people who think they already own something is that they stop pretending. They let their greed show in plain sight. After that Sunday dinner where I hinted about selling, my children began to act bolder. They stopped treading lightly around me and started speaking as though the house was already theirs. And in a way, that was a gift. It stripped away any last illusions I might have had. One afternoon, Patricia dropped by unannounced. She strolled into my kitchen like she owned the place, plopping her purse down on the counter. "Mom," she began, her tone rehearsed, "I've been thinking. It makes the most sense for me to take over the beach house now. I can manage it better than the others, keep it in shape. And honestly, Andrew doesn't even care about things like this." I raised an eyebrow, folding my dish towel slowly. "Andrew cares more than you think." She waved her hand dismissively. "He's too soft. He'll roll over for Daniel anyway. Better to settle it now, before there's a fight. You don't want things to get ugly, do you?" There it was again. Before it turns ugly. As though the ugliness hadn't already been born the moment they left me alone in that hospital bed. I looked at her carefully, and for the first time, I didn't see my daughter. I saw a woman calculating property, weighing inheritance, speaking not to her mother, but to a gatekeeper standing in her way. I smiled faintly. "I'll think about it." She left satisfied, as though she had won some invisible battle. Little did she know, the war had already been decided. Not long after, Daniel called. His voice was sharp, commanding, the way he used to speak when he was a teenager trying to boss around his younger siblings. "Mom, we need to be practical," he said. "The beach house is wasted sitting empty most of the year. Emily and I could use it. We take care of it, rent it out when it's not in use. It could make money instead of sitting there like a shrine." A shrine. That's what he called it. My jaw tightened, but I forced calm into my voice. "It's not wasted. It's my memory of your father." He laughed softly, almost pitying. "Mom, Dad's gone. The house is just a building. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." For a moment, I nearly lost my composure. My voice wavered. Your father built that house with his own hands. But Daniel only sighed, impatient. And now it's time to be realistic. We'll talk more at the house this weekend. That call haunted me. The way he dismissed James. The way he dismissed me. But instead of breaking me, it steeled me. Because Daniel was wrong. It wasn't just a building. It was proof of love, of sacrifice, of everything we had built together. And if my children couldn't respect that, then they didn't deserve to stand in its doorway ever again. The final test came with Andrew, sweet, quiet Andrew, who always sat at the edge of arguments, never speaking up. He came by one evening, shuffling awkwardly in the doorway, his eyes darting away from mine. "Mom," he began, hesitating, "I don't want to upset you, but maybe Patricia and Daniel are right. Maybe you should decide now what happens to the house. It'll make things easier later." I felt my heart twist. Of all of them, I had hoped Andrew would stand by me. But there it was. Even he was caught in the web. I put my hand gently over his. "Andrew, let me ask you something. When I was in the hospital, did you miss me? Did you worry about me?" His face flushed. He looked down. "Of course, Mom." "Then why weren't you there?" He didn't answer. He just shifted uncomfortably, his silence louder than words. I pulled my hand back. That's all I needed to know. That night, as I lay in bed, I no longer wavered. Every shred of doubt had been stripped away. They didn't see me, they didn't hear me, they only saw the house, the prize. So I whispered into the dark, the words steady and sure. They think I won't do it, but I will, and they'll never see it coming. The next morning, I called Robert. "Find me the buyer," I said simply, and with those 5 words, I sealed my children's fate. The morning I met Robert at his office, the sky was gray, heavy clouds rolling in from the coast. Fitting, I thought. It felt like the world itself knew something was about to change. Robert greeted me with the same warmth he always carried, though I could see the concern in his eyes. "Lillian," he said gently, "are you ready?" I nodded, though my throat tightened. I have to be. He led me into his office where a neat folder sat waiting on the polished oak desk. Inside were the papers. Appraisals, contracts, signatures half-filled, waiting only for mine. The name of the buyer was there too, Michael Harwood, out of state, cash in hand. Robert had assured me he was a quiet man, no fuss, no interest in town gossip. He just wanted a place by the sea where no one knew him, exactly the kind of man I needed. Before signing, I asked Robert for one last thing. "Take me there," I said, "to the house, one more time, alone." He hesitated, then nodded. Of course. The drive to the coast was silent. My hands gripped the hem of my cardigan as the familiar dunes came into view, and when the house finally appeared, its weathered white siding, the porch James built by hand, my chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I stepped inside slowly, my cane tapping against the worn wooden floor. Every corner whispered memories. The kitchen where James burned pancakes, the staircase where Patricia once slid down on a blanket, the back door where Daniel snuck out as a teenager, thinking I wouldn't notice. Even Andrew's muddy handprints still faintly stained the hallway wall from a long-ago summer storm. It wasn't just a house. It was 40 years of my life. Tears blurred my vision as I ran my palm over the mantel where James's seashell collection once sat. My fingers brushed the grooves in the wood he carved himself, each mark a love letter in timber. "James," I whispered into the empty air, "forgive me. But they don't deserve this. They don't deserve you." The silence that followed was deep, almost comforting, as if he were telling me he understood. Back at Robert's office, I signed the papers. My hand trembled, the pen scratching across the page like a final goodbye. With each stroke of ink, the weight shifted, off my shoulders onto the paper, away from their grasping hands. When it was done, Robert placed his hand over mine. "It's final, Lillian. It's his now. No one can touch it." I nodded, a tear slipping free. Good, that's how it has to be. The sale was silent. No signs out front, no whisper in the town gossip mill. Robert handled it like the gentleman he was. Discreet, quick, efficient. Within days, the money was in my account, clean and secure. Enough to cover my medical bills, with more left over for me to live comfortably without leaning on anyone. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the freedom. For the first time in months, maybe years, I slept soundly. And yet, selling a home is not like selling a chair or a table. You don't just walk away unscarred. That week, I dreamt of James almost every night. In one dream, he was on the porch, hammer in hand, smiling as the children played. In another, he sat beside me, his hand warm on mine, saying, "You did what you had to, Lil. You chose peace." I woke each time with tears on my cheeks, but the tears weren't regret. They were release. When the transfer was complete, Robert handed me the keys. I stared at them in my palm for a long moment, feeling the weight of years condensed into cold metal. Then I placed them on the desk in front of him. "Give them to him," I said. "They're no longer mine." Walking out of that office, I felt strange, lighter, yet hollow, like I had closed a door in my heart and locked it forever. But it was the only way, because while my children thought they were circling their prize, I had already removed it from their reach. That night, I sat in my recliner, sipping tea, when my phone buzzed. It was Patricia. "Mom, we're planning to head to the beach house this weekend, just making sure you won't be there since you're still recovering." I smiled faintly, my lips curling in a way they hadn't in weeks. "No," I replied simply. "I won't be there." And I wasn't lying. It happened sooner than I expected. The following Saturday, the sun was bright and hot, the kind of summer day that once would have drawn us all to the shore. I was sitting on my porch, watering the petunias, when Patricia's name lit up my phone. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mom," she said, her voice brisk. "We're heading down to the beach house now. Daniel and Andrew are bringing the kids. We'll be there for the week, so if you need anything, call after." For a second, I almost laughed out loud. They still thought it was theirs. They still thought I was the one who needed to work around their schedule. I forced a neutral tone. "Have a nice trip." She hung up without another word. Hours later, as the day melted into evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Patricia's number, but an unfamiliar one. I answered, and a man's voice came through, firm but polite. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Michael Harwood. I believe you're the previous owner of the beach house." My stomach tightened. "Yes. Is everything all right?" He exhaled slowly. "Your family just showed up at the property. They insisted it was theirs. They tried to get inside, but of course their keys don't work anymore. When I explained I was the new owner, they refused to believe me. They're still on the porch now, shouting." For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the image form. Patricia, with her hands on her hips, Daniel red-faced and blustering, Andrew hanging back but still there, the children confused and restless. Exactly the scene I had pictured. "I'm sorry for the trouble," I said calmly. "Do whatever you need to do. It's your house now." There was a pause. Then Michael said, "I've called security. They'll handle it." Later, Mrs. Carter called me, her voice trembling with both shock and glee. "Lillian, I shouldn't laugh, but, oh, if you'd seen their faces." She described it in detail. Patricia pounding on the door, yelling about her inheritance. Daniel waving his old key like it was some golden ticket, demanding Michael let him in. Andrew standing off to the side, muttering, "There must be some mistake." Then security arrived. 2 broad-shouldered men in dark uniforms, calmly but firmly telling my children to step back. When Patricia refused, one of them simply said, "Ma'am, this is trespassing. You need to leave." Mrs. Carter nearly cackled. Patricia's jaw dropped so far I thought it might hit the ground, and Daniel turned as red as a lobster. They kept shouting that it was their family house, that you must have been tricked, but Michael stood there with the deed in his hand, cool as you please. I sat back in my chair, the petunias wilting in the evening heat, and let the words wash over me like music. Not long after, my phone rang again, this time Daniel's number. I answered, and his voice thundered. Through the line, "Mom, what the hell did you do?" I stayed quiet for a beat, savoring the silence on my end. Then I said softly, "I sold it." There was a pause, stunned, breathless, before he roared, "You what?" "I sold the house," I repeated, my tone steady. "It's not yours. It never was." On the other end, chaos erupted, Patricia's voice shouting in the background, "She can't do that! Tell her she can't do that!" Emily chiming in, sharp as ever. "It's illegal, Daniel. It has to be." Daniel hissed into the phone. "Why, Mom? Why would you betray us like this?" I closed my eyes, letting the calm settle in me like a tide. Betray you? You betrayed me when you left me alone in a hospital bed while you sat on that porch, arguing over a house. You made your choice. I made mine. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. For once, none of them had words. I hung up before they could find their tongues. Then I sat there, alone but not lonely, listening to the cicadas sing in the trees. For the first time in years, I felt free. Later that night, I received a text from Andrew. Unlike the others, it wasn't angry. It was just 3 words. "Why, Mom? Why?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed back, "Because you never asked how I was, only what I had." I never got a reply. By the time security escorted them off the property, the sun had begun to sink low over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of orange and purple. Fitting, I thought, for the bruised egos my children must have been nursing as they stumbled back to their cars. Michael called me again later that evening, his tone calm but resolute. "They've gone now, Mrs. Hayes. Security made it clear. They're not welcome here. I apologize for the disturbance, but I assure you it won't happen again." I thanked him sincerely. "No need to apologize, Mr. Harwood. It isn't your burden. It was mine. And now it's done." And just like that, it was done. A clean break. But of course, my children didn't see it that way. The next morning, the storm arrived. Patricia was the first at my doorstep, her fists pounding the wood so hard I thought it might splinter. When I opened the door, she stormed inside without waiting for an invitation. Her face was flushed, her voice shrill. "How dare you? That house was supposed to be ours. You had no right." I stood by the dining table, steadying myself against the edge. My side still ached from surgery, but my voice did not waver. "I had every right, Patricia. It was mine to give, and I chose not to give it to you." Daniel appeared behind her, his jaw clenched, Emily close at his side. Andrew trailed in last, his head down, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. The sight of all 3 of my children standing there in my living room should have felt familiar, comforting. Instead, it felt like facing strangers. Daniel's voice was low, almost a growl. "You've ruined this family. Do you understand that? Selling that house was cruel. It was selfish." I met his glare. Selfish. You want to talk about selfish? You weren't by my side when I went under anesthesia. You weren't there when I woke up. You weren't there when the doctor said I might not survive. You were at the beach house fighting over what you'd get when I died. They flinched, but no one spoke. "You betrayed me long before I betrayed you," I continued, my voice steady. "You made it clear that the house mattered more than I did, so I made sure it would never belong to people who valued walls more than their mother." Emily sneered, her eyes narrowing. "So you'd rather give it to some stranger? Some outsider who doesn't even belong here?" Yes, I said, surprising even myself with how firm the word came out. Because that stranger didn't abandon me. That stranger didn't measure my worth by what I owned. For the first time, Patricia faltered. Her eyes glistened, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue but had no words left. Daniel turned red, his fists balling at his sides. Andrew just looked at me, his eyes hollow, his lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, I stepped closer, gripping the back of a chair for balance. Listen carefully. You will never set foot in that house again. It is gone. And if you can't forgive me for that, then so be it. But don't you dare come into my home and tell me about betrayal. I lived it the day you chose a beach house over your mother. Silence swallowed the room. Patricia's shoulders sagged, the fight leaking out of her. Daniel muttered something under his breath, grabbed Emily's arm, and stormed out. Patricia followed, dabbing at her eyes. Andrew lingered for a moment, his eyes locked on mine. For a heartbeat, I thought he might say something, maybe even apologize. But in the end, he turned and left without a word. When the door closed, I sank into my chair, my body trembling from the confrontation. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the kind of quiet that hurt anymore. It was the kind that felt like peace. I whispered to James's photo on the mantel, "I think you'd be proud of me, love." I finally stood up for us. Later that night, Patricia sent one last text. "You've destroyed this family. I hope you're happy." I typed slowly, carefully, "No, Patricia. I didn't destroy this family. I revealed what it had already become." And for once, I put the phone down without waiting for a reply. News travels fast in a small town. By the following week, whispers were already swirling. At the church potluck, at the grocery store, even at the post office, I caught snippets of hushed voices. "Did you hear? Lillian sold the beach house. They say her kids were thrown out by security." Imagine the embarrassment. I kept my chin high, even as the stares prickled at my skin. For the first time, I didn't feel ashamed. The shame wasn't mine to carry anymore. But my children, they carried it like a torch. Daniel showed up again one evening, this time alone. He didn't knock. He barged in, his face twisted with fury. "You've humiliated us," he spat. "Do you understand that? Everyone in town is talking. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family's name?" I folded my hands in my lap, calm as a still pond. "The only humiliation here is yours, Daniel. And you earned it." His voice rose. "We're your blood, Mom. You don't turn your back on your own blood." I looked at him steadily. "Blood means nothing if it doesn't come with love. Where was your blood when I lay in a hospital bed? Where was your blood when I needed someone to hold my hand?" His mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time, I saw the boy he used to be, caught in a lie, unable to twist his way out. Finally, he muttered, "You'll regret this," and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Patricia's backlash came differently. She launched a campaign of guilt. Calls, texts, emails, each one dripping with wounded pride. "How could you do this to us, Mom? Dad would be ashamed of you. You've broken this family beyond repair." At first, the words stung. The thought of James's name being used against me made my stomach churn. But then I remembered the truth. James would never have abandoned me. James would never have let property matter more than people. And so I wrote her back only once. "Don't use your father's name to justify your greed. He built that house for love, not for you to fight over like dogs." After that, I stopped answering. Andrew was the quiet one, as always. He didn't yell or text. Instead, he avoided me entirely. No calls, no visits, just absence. At first, that hurt most of all. But then I realized something. Silence, too, was an answer. His loyalty had never been to me, only to keeping peace between his siblings. And in choosing peace for them, he chose distance from me. And that was his choice to live with. But while my children raged, something unexpected happened. The community, the people who had known me for decades, began to quietly rally. At the market, old Mrs. Willis pressed my hand and said softly, "You did the right thing, dear. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." At church, one of the ladies from choir leaned close and whispered, "Family is about who shows up. You remember that." Even strangers nodded at me differently with a kind of quiet respect. Not everyone agreed, of course. A few clucked their tongues, muttering that I was harsh or too extreme. But those voices didn't weigh me down anymore, because for every critic, there was someone else reminding me I wasn't wrong. The real turning point came at church, the next Sunday. I walked in, head held high, cane tapping against the tile. My children were there too, sitting together, stiff as boards, whispers following them like shadows. During coffee hour afterward, Patricia cornered me, her voice trembling with anger. "You've made a fool of us. Do you even realize people are laughing at us?" I met her glare with steady calm. "People aren't laughing because of me, Patricia. They're laughing because you showed your true colors, and I refuse to cover for you anymore." Gasps rippled nearby. People had heard. Patricia's face flushed crimson, her eyes brimming with tears of fury. She spun on her heel and stormed out, Daniel and Andrew trailing behind her like storm clouds. But I stayed. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down with Mrs. Willis, and smiled. For the first time in weeks, I enjoyed the taste. That evening, alone in my quiet house, I thought about what had happened. My children hated me now. Maybe they always would. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel small in their shadow. I felt tall again, even as my body aged and bent. I had chosen myself. I had chosen dignity. And no amount of whispers could take that away. In towns like ours, nothing stays private for long. You could whisper your secrets into the wind, and by morning they'd be stitched into the fabric of every conversation. The sale of the beach house and the spectacle of my children being turned away at its doors became the talk of the town. Everywhere I went, eyes followed me, some with sympathy, some with judgment, others with quiet admiration. At the grocery store, I was reaching for a bag of flour when two women at the end of the aisle leaned close, their voices hushed but not enough to hide. "Can you believe it?" one murmured. "Sold it right from under them." The other clicked her tongue. "I heard she didn't even tell them. Imagine your own mother doing that." I kept my head high, though my chest tightened. Then, just as I turned the corner, another voice, a younger woman I barely knew, smiled at me and said softly, "Good for you, Mrs. Hayes. Some people forget mothers are human, too." That single kindness outweighed the whispers. At the pharmacy, the clerk, a boy no older than 19, surprised me. As he rang up my medicine, he leaned forward and said, "My grandma did something like you, gave her farm to the neighbor instead of her kids because they didn't deserve it. She said, 'I'd rather see strangers care for it than watch my own children tear it apart. You remind me of her.'" I walked out of that store with my head higher than when I entered. But not everyone was supportive. At church the next week, one of the elders, Mr. Thompson, shook his head at me. "Family's family, Lillian. No matter what, selling to a stranger." I don't know if I could have done it. I met his gaze and answered, calm but firm. "Family isn't just about blood, Mr. Thompson. It's about who shows up. And when I was on that hospital table, my blood wasn't there." He had no reply to that. He just pressed his lips together and walked away. The strongest support came from the women in my circle, the ones who had lived long enough to know what betrayal feels like. At quilting group, Mrs. Willis squeezed my hand and whispered, "You saved yourself from being eaten alive. Don't ever doubt it." At the library, where I volunteered a few hours a week, Mrs. Turner pulled me aside. "I wish I'd had your courage when my children started circling my house. Instead, I let them. And now I live in the back room while they tear it apart with their parties. Her eyes glistened. You did the right thing. Their words soothed me more than they could know. Still, there were moments when I wondered if I had been too harsh, nights when the house was too quiet, when the ticking of the clock echoed louder than my thoughts. I'd sit in my recliner, staring at the framed photos of my children in younger days. Daniel holding his first fish with James, Patricia in her ballet tutu, Andrew with his gap-toothed smile. I'd whisper to those photos, "Where did you go? Where did those children disappear to?" But then I'd remember the hospital room, the silence, Mrs. Carter's voice telling me they were at the beach house instead of with me, and the doubt would wash away. One afternoon, while walking back from the post office, Mrs. Carter herself joined me. She looped her arm through mine, steadying my steps. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest," she said with a wry smile. I chuckled softly. "Seems I have." She gave my hand a squeeze. "But I'll tell you something. People admire strength, even if they don't admit it. And you, Lillian, have shown more strength than most of us ever dream of." Her words warmed me in a way my children's never could anymore. In the weeks that followed, I began spending more time outside of the house, volunteering at the community center, reading to children at the library, hosting tea with a few neighbors who still saw me as more than a headline. It was strange, losing my children's closeness but gaining the quiet respect of people who had once been little more than acquaintances. And it made me realize something. Maybe family isn't always the people you raise. Maybe sometimes family is the people who stand beside you when the storm comes. And in that sense, I was not alone. After the storm had passed, the shouting, the texts, the glares at church, a strange calm settled over my life. The kind of calm that comes not from peace offered to you, but from peace you carve out for yourself. My children stopped coming around. Patricia retreated into silence after her last angry message. Daniel, proud as ever, refused to look at me when we crossed paths in town. And Andrew faded into the background, neither defending me nor condemning me, just quietly vanishing. It hurt. I won't lie to you. It hurt in ways I can't even put into words. To carry 3 children inside my body, to rock them to sleep in my arms, to bandage their scraped knees, only to be discarded like an old coat when the shine of inheritance glimmered brighter. That kind of hurt doesn't leave you easily, but I also knew this: hurt doesn't have to rule you. So I began rebuilding my days, brick by quiet brick. Every morning I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the waves in the distance. I no longer had the beach house porch, but the sea, oh, the sea. It was still mine to look at, to breathe in, to listen to. James and I used to say the ocean keeps secrets safe. Now it felt like it was keeping mine. I started volunteering more at the community center, reading stories to children who reminded me of mine when they were small. Their wide eyes, their laughter, their endless curiosity. It healed something inside me, something my own children had chipped away. Neighbors began dropping by more often too. Mrs. Carter with her jam, Mrs. Willis with her quilts, even young mothers from the library thanking me for helping with story hour. It wasn't the same as having my children around, but it was something real. And slowly, I realized something that changed me. I had spent years clinging to the idea that legacy meant leaving something behind for my children. A house, an inheritance, a piece of property. But legacy isn't about wood and stone. It isn't about deeds or titles. Legacy is about how you live, the love you give, the dignity you refuse to surrender. And by selling that house, by standing up and saying, "I am worth more than what I own," I had written a new kind of legacy, one that said, "Love me for who I am. not for what I leave behind. One evening, as I sipped tea on my porch, the setting sun casting gold across the sky, I spoke softly to James's picture again. They think I was cruel, love. They think I betrayed them. But I know, and you'd know too, that the betrayal wasn't mine. It was theirs, and I couldn't let them bury me under it. The photo, of course, didn't answer, but in the hush of the evening, in the soft roll of the tide, I felt his approval, not loud, not grand, just quiet, steady, like the man he had always been, and that was enough. From then on, I stopped waiting for apologies that might never come. I stopped hoping for my children to change. Instead, I began hoping for something different, that maybe one day they'd look in the mirror and realize what they lost. And if they didn't, well, I would still have myself, and that, at last, felt like enough. Now, as I sit here, telling you this story, I want you to understand one thing above all. I didn't sell the house out of spite. I sold it out of love. Love for myself, love for James, love for the life we built together that I refused to let be desecrated by greed. My children thought they could measure my worth in bricks and beams, in property lines and deeds. But I am more than that, and so are you. The truth is, they didn't just lose a house. They lost something far greater, my trust. And once trust is gone, no roof in the world can shelter you again. I don't know if they'll ever forgive me. I don't know if they'll ever even try. But forgiveness isn't my burden anymore. My burden was carrying their entitlement, their absence, their betrayal, and I've laid it down. Now my days are quieter. I read, I garden. I walk to the sea when my legs will carry me. Sometimes Mrs. Carter joins me, and we sit on a bench, listening to the gulls cry overhead. And in those moments, I feel something I never thought I'd feel again after all this. Peace. So if you're listening to me, wherever you are, I want you to take this with you. Love is shown in actions, not in words. If someone values what you own more than who you are, don't be afraid to let go. Even if it hurts, even if it means standing alone, because sometimes standing alone is the only way to stand tall. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but I hope it helps someone out there. Someone who feels unseen, someone who's been made to believe they're only worth what they leave behind. You're worth more, I promise you that. Now tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know.